Hey everybody, Lindsay here with High Altitude Astrology, bringing another video. I've been reflecting on this full moon, which occurred on Monday, September 24th, 2018 in the sign of Aries. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about it from the perspective of some of the reflections I've been having. So this full moon in Aries was conjunct Chiron, which is the wounded healer in the sign of Aries, very closely conjunct. And for me, what this is symbolic of is the wounded feminine energy, because the moon has to do with female energy, our ability to nurture, our ability to feel and sense, our ability to express our emotions. And the full moon was in Aries, which is the sign of strength and courage and asserting ourselves. But with Chiron next to that moon, you get a wounded expression of that moon in Aries energy. And those wounds may have to do with something that has come from our childhood or even other lifetimes, as the moon is the receptacle of our memories. But the wound has something to do with the inability to assert the self. So I find it interesting that a few things have been happening around this time. Well, first of all, the day that I'm making this video is the 25th of September, and the moon, still in Aries, is now squaring Pluto in Capricorn. And just today, the news was revealed that Bill Cosby is going to be sentenced, I believe, 3 to 5 years in prison for his sexual assault on one of the women who accused him, one of the many women. So I do find it very interesting that today that information is coming out in this moon squared Pluto energy of, revealing what's hidden beneath the surface. But I'm also looking at this from another perspective. While I do think it's very important that retribution is and fairness and justice is found, which of course is what the energy opposite this moon Chiron in Aries is. It's Sun in Libra. So it's about creating that balance between the wounded feminine principle and then the ability to shine our individuality through finding harmony and balance. But one thing that came to mind in the midst of all of this happened yesterday morning when Sean Penn was talking about the Me Too movement in an interview on the Today Show. And he said that he felt the movement was salacious, and he felt that it was dividing men and women more than it was uniting men and women. And the reason he felt this was that he felt like a movement that is full of accusations and anger is not necessarily going to actually bring people together. He thinks the issue is more nuanced, and that every case needs to be handled individually before somebody's career is completely ruined because of an accusation. And this is something I personally have been feeling myself, even though I organized the Women's March in 2017 after the presidential election. And I was, very inspired and affected by the election. And I have come to have some additional feelings around this issue of trying to heal the divide between men and women and how women have been treated. And my feeling around it is more along the lines of what Sean Penn is saying, which is that it's not really fair, Moon and Sun in Libra, to necessarily have this wounded feminine energy just, destroying people without due process. And, let me get into this a little bit further. I'm not saying that people shouldn't, be held accountable. They absolutely should. But I think there's another layer to this, or another piece to this that hasn't been discussed that needs to be talked about. And this is what's coming to me at this full moon time with the moon and Chiron and Aries conjunct. There's something about the wounded feminine that needs to be healed. And this piece of it, in my opinion, has to do with how women have sacrificed themselves in order to try to gain. And what I mean by this, or let me put it another way, it even could just be women using their masculine energy in an aggressive way that has caused imbalance. So let me give an example. I was a model back in the early 90s in New York City, and I wanted some photography pictures for my portfolio, and I didn't have any money to get them. And I recall consciously, going to the house of a photographer who invited me to dinner and doing a photo shoot and kind of having to fight this, experience of whether or not something was going to happen to me. But I wanted those pictures, and I put myself in that situation in order to get them. And that's what I think part of this piece to the wounded feminine energy that isn't being discussed. How women are responsible for trying to go after things perhaps in a way that isn't actually fair and balanced in the larger picture of relating to somebody else. And I think that it can get dangerous. And that's what, to me, this Venus in Scorpio that has just entered and is going to be going retrograde back and forth over the next 4 months is also bringing up, and it is a part of this full moon, is that we need to investigate how we assert our Venus energy, which is our feminine desire principle, what we want, things we like, what we find beautiful, what we find pleasurable. That's all Venus. But in Scorpio, it has to do with knowing our true deep desires and not manipulating and not taking advantage of in order to get those desires met. Now, another piece to this full moon has to do with the fact that the moon and Chiron conjunct in Aries opposite the sun in Libra conjunct Mercury. And by the way, Mercury is kind of combust in the conjunction because it's so tightly conjunct the sun that it's like the solar energy is taking over in this dynamic, meaning that I think it relates more to how we are needing to express our individuality. That's the solar nature, the solar principle, that we really need to embody in our consciousness the energy of Libra and not be kind of confused in our minds with Mercury in Libra weighing things out so much. This is really acting in ways that reflect creating harmony and balance. So those two polarities square the Saturn in Capricorn, and that's the outlet for the T-square at this full moon chart. And to me, Saturn in Capricorn is about taking responsibility. It's about standing in our personal authority, doing it ourselves. Not waiting for somebody else to do it. And I know that this is a challenging topic because I think sometimes when people hear, oh, you're not siding with every single victim, that's what they think you're saying. And it's not. It's adding to the conversation. It's saying, okay, yes, these things need to stop happening to women. But there is also perhaps another more nuanced piece to it that has to do with, the culture that women have participated in for a long time. I mean, if you think about the 1950s, it's like a woman just found the man that she married, had kids, and raised them, and that was her security. That's what women did. A lot of women, not all women, but a lot of them. So we're coming from that culture that we created with men, for a long time, that is now beginning to shift and change. And it's like spiritually we're having to catch up with what's happening, on the physical level. And that spiritual catching up, I think, does involve healing this divide between men and women, healing this culture that women have participated in. And I think that's part of the realization at this full moon time that, not only, yes, it's important to say we cannot take this anymore as women. We will not, be put down and abused. But we also, as women, need to look at if there is a role in our responsibility in the relationships that we've created with men in our lives. And Jane Fonda was interviewed. There's an HBO special 5-part series that's coming up on HBO, and I saw her interviewed on The View yesterday, and she was talking about, because she's a big advocate for women's rights, and she was a big advocate for getting out of Vietnam back in the day. And, she is definitely a, women's advocate, women's rights advocate. But she also did say, she's been married 3 times, and she said something to the effect of, I have had to take responsibility for the choices I made to basically marry an asshole, is kind of how she put it, and forgive myself, and, move on. So she's talking about that need for Saturn and Capricorn, taking responsibility. Now she's talking about it from well, that guy was a jerk and I put myself in that situation with him. I'm talking about something as well as that, but even more subtly nuanced. And it has to do with how women wield their power and perhaps how we've done it in the past because we felt like we weren't capable of doing it any other way. I mean, that is Moon conjunct Chiron in Aries. It's the wound around self-assertion. It's a wound around feeling that we're capable of asserting ourselves. So to me, this is just a really intense full moon that's bringing to light, a lot of these sort of undercurrents of these dynamics between men and women. And, and this can be not just between men and women, but it can be also manifest as anyone's female energy, wounded female energy, and how they feel they've gone about using it in order to try to get what they want, or how they feel they've been unable to use their strength and their, courage to get what they want, or to say what they need to say, or to express themselves. Another piece to this has to do with the fact that today Chiron has begun retrograding into Pisces. And Chiron in Pisces has to do with the wound around trusting, the wound around having faith, that there's a larger order to things, and it has to do with the ability to ultimately forgive and let go. Martin Lass writes about it in Chiron Healing Body and Soul, where he says that the path to oneness is only attained when we can see that all things serve us in our lives, that all things serve our healing and evolution of consciousness. All things are divine acts of love. The more we see and acknowledge the hidden purpose behind seemingly, quote, wrong events and circumstances, the more we are inclined to open the doors that we shut so tightly in the beginning. The more we can do this, the more we can regain trust in a guiding hand, trust in a universal plan, trust in God, and trust in the omnipresence of love. He goes on to say, paradoxically, we regain trust by trusting and faith by having faith. Real trust and faith, though, are based upon observed facts. They are based upon a balanced perception that sees all sides of any given situation. Balanced perception sees the justice in the injustice, the fairness in the unfairness, the equity in the inequity, the blessings in the crisis, the cloud's silver lining, and the lessons, gifts, and service inherent in every manifestation of creation. And the last part I want to talk about at this full moon time is that there's an interesting inconjunct between that Sun and Mercury in Libra and Uranus in Taurus. And Uranus is going to be in Taurus for the next 7 years or so. And Uranus in Taurus is about revolutionizing our values. It's about discovering what we do find valuable and discovering more self-worth too, because that's really what Taurus is about. It's the second sign of the zodiac. It's after Aries, which is like, here I am. Now Taurus is I have. And in order to get, you have to feel confident that you're capable of doing that. So I think part of this Uranus and Taurus transformation is going to be revolutionizing personal self-worth. It's going to be revolutionizing our ability to gain material things for ourselves. It's going to be revolutionizing what we find valuable in the material world. Is it really what we thought? Because Uranus is really more detached and it isn't so much about the material things in life. So it's an interesting place for Uranus to be in Taurus because it's potentially going to kind of shake us loose from some of the attachment that we maybe have had to materialism and maybe the materialism that we've been seeking in relationships, Sun in Libra. So these have been some thoughts that have been bubbling up for me at this full moon time. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any comments, please leave them for me. I'd love to hear what you have to think about this topic. And I want to thank you so much for watching, and I will catch up to you later. Adios.